Well, I think most of us remember our first car, right? You remember your first car? I think most of us, we sort of have this affinity for that first car that we ever drove, and my first car is no exception to that. I recall that first car. It was a hand-me-down from my grandfather, and we'll just say I learned a lot of lessons in that car. I hit at least 2 curbs that I can recall, and it did significant damage. And then I had an accident that did pretty much the same exact damage. I was hit on the side, and it just pushed that front tire back, so it was just like hitting a curb. So I feel like I hit 3 curbs, and I learned a lot of lessons in that first car. And then came my second car, and that one I was much more proud of, the second car. The first car had kind of gone through all the problems that it had, and I came home from college one weekend, and Dad asked me to go out in the garage to get something, and I walked out there. Now, my dad's not one for theatrics, so this really isn't much like him. So I go out to the garage, and out of the corner of my eye, I never turn the light on. In the corner of my eye, I just see a car that I don't recognize, and I go back in, and I go, whose car is in our garage? And Dad goes, you might want to go check it out again. And I go out and turn the light on. Had I turned the light on the first time, I would have realized, again, not a man for theatrics, a big red bow on top of the car. Now, don't get me wrong, most of the time you see that, and it's like, the kid's graduation present, it's a new BMW or something like that. That's not what this was. This was an old, used Honda Prelude, which was a pretty good car for a kid in college. I mean, it was a fast little car, and so I was really proud of that car. I really, really liked that car. It was one of my favorite cars. It had a sunroof, plus it was almost a sports car. It certainly wasn't a muscle car by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a fun car to own. And I would have to say that I pushed that car to the limits a few times. I kind of have to admit that here at church in front of you, confess my sins. In northeastern Oklahoma, you're at the foothills of the Ozarks, which is where I was going to college straight out of high school, Northeastern State University. And if you're going from, say, Tahlequah, where Northeastern State University is, and you're headed toward Oklahoma City, on one of the highways, you're going to encounter this hill that is extremely steep. If you start at the top of that hill and put your car in neutral and coast down that hill, you'll be going over 100 fairly quickly. It's so steep. And so I would start at the top of that hill and punch the gas pedal and see just how fast I could get my car up to. And I have to admit that I don't even know exactly how fast I was going, because the needle kind of stopped moving, and I was just praying that there was no cop hiding around at the bottom. But I know that I didn't get caught as many times as I should have, and I'm sure that you are probably not much different, that there's plenty of times where you could have got pulled over but didn't. But there were times where I found myself with flashing lights behind me. You ever been there? None of you, right? I'm the only one. You get that flashing light behind you, especially when you're first starting out as a driver. Man, your heart rate just pumps as fast as the car's going, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And then you're sitting on the side of the road with these flashing lights behind you, and you're just thinking, maybe he'll give me a warning. 120 is not that fast, is it? Actually, on a side note, my first ticket that I ever got was through a school zone. So I was pretty much, some people get a leeway, if it's your first ticket and the cop will go easy on you. Not in a school zone. They don't usually go easy on you. So I've had every ticket just about that I could get. But you get nervous, right? And what happens is you begin to recognize that there's a pattern of, if I go fast and there's a cop there, I'm going to get pulled over. And so what happens is, whether you're going fast or not, you see a police officer's car, what do? Right? You tap the brakes. Well, how fast am I going? Was I going too fast? What was the speed limit? I don't even know. I haven't seen a sign in like 5 minutes. I don't know how fast it is right now. And so we get worried, we get nervous, and we want to tap the brakes. One of my buddies from Oklahoma, I think it was in Bixby, Oklahoma, he posted a picture, which is great. He's taking a picture while he's driving, of a police car in somebody's yard, that's sort of a decoy police car, apparently, because they had mowed all around the police car, but not like right up against the car. Nobody weed eated. They didn't bother to weed eat. So it's obvious that this is a decoy car, because you're like, okay, how long has that cop car been sitting there? But you know what? I bet it does the trick, right? Because your instincts are, I see a cop car, oh, I hit my brakes. How fast am I going? Am I doing anything wrong? And that's just what happens. Unfortunately, we tend to view God the same way a lot of times, where we think about God in our life and we go, what am have I been doing anything wrong? How was I this week? Was I good? And we put pressure on ourselves. Maybe you can't relate to being pulled over. Maybe you're a parent, though. You can certainly relate to walking in on your kid. You know, you open the door and they go, and you know that something's going on. And maybe they've been quiet for a while and you're going back in to check on them, and you know that there's something going on. They always, your first question is, what are you doing? And they go, nothing. I don't think that's the right answer. I'm pretty sure there's something else going on here. And then they go, what? I didn't strap the cat to a rocket and dress it up and put lipstick on it. I don't know how that happened. And you're thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure you know exactly how that happened. And the same thing is true with God. We get nervous. We get worried that God is going to judge us. We get worried that he's going to flip his lights on and come chasing after us and issue us a sin citation for the sin that's in our life. And that's just the wrong interpretation of who God is. So today we're the second sermon in this series called Indescribable. Last week we looked at the indescribable creator and how huge the universe is. And this week we're going to look at an indescribable grace. One of God's many qualities is his indescribable grace. And so hopefully by the end of this we get a better understanding of how we should view God. That he's not necessarily that police officer who's out to get us and write us a ticket for every sin that we did wrong. He's not that overbearing parent that comes barging in. But God is a God of grace and mercy. So if you have your Bibles, grab them and turn to John, the Gospel of John, chapter 8. We're going to look at a story that I think is just a perfect example of God's indescribable grace. And you'll probably notice in the footnotes of your Bible, and if you're familiar with this story, you've known this already, that this particular story is not in every manuscript of the Bible. In fact, most of the older ones don't have this story at all. So then you start asking questions like, well, did it really happen? Did it get added to the Bible later on? And I think the important part is it really doesn't matter, because it is a prime example of how Jesus operates. And it would be a tragedy if it were not included in our Bible, because so many examples of how Jesus thinks can be pulled out of this story. And so let's get started. We're going to actually start at the second verse. John chapter 8, verse 2. It says, "At dawn he appeared again." He is Jesus. Jesus appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. So notice that Jesus here, in this instance, he's in the temple courts. There's a lot of times we see in Jesus' life this pattern of how he wants to get away from people. He's bombarded by people. These multitudes are following him no matter where he is. Even when he's in the temple courts, there's this multitude. But this particular day, he's encouraging this, wanting to teach. And so he's in the temple courts and he's teaching them. Verse 3, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group." So here the church leaders of his day, the Jewish leaders, those temple leaders, it seems like they must have known something about this woman, because they were able to catch her in the act of adultery. So whether this was a common practice for her, whether she was known to be this type of woman, whether she was a prostitute. Some people think that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. They think that this was Mary Magdalene. They kind of try to put two and two together. We don't know any of that. I'm just saying she must have been known to be this type of woman, where the church leaders knew exactly where to find her, what time of day, when, and how. It couldn't have just, well, it could have, but it couldn't have just been coincidence that she shows up on the scene as Jesus is teaching. And so they drag her in the middle of whatever was going on. And so what I encourage you to picture is this woman who is caught red-handed in this sinful act of adultery, probably very little clothes on, embarrassed, It's probably tears already running down her face, and they just throw her down in the dirt right at Jesus' feet. And so the dirt mixed with her tears, she's probably got mud on her face, maybe in her hair, maybe she was sweaty, and she looks like it. She just looks awful. She's in this awful predicament, this awful stance. And not only is she embarrassed because these church leaders have drug her out of this situation, but they're throwing her in front of Jesus in this moment. But apparently they have a much larger purpose for doing this. Verse 4, then the leaders said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" So here the church leaders, they approach Jesus with this question. Now these are teachers of the law, so they know the answer to the question. In fact, they even state it in their question. Now Moses tells us to stone them. They know the law like the back of their hand. So there's more to the questioning than simply looking for a single answer, other than what we're going to learn is to trap him, to trick him, because they're really only giving him two choices. But the choice they think, the one that they mention, is the law of Moses, and that's found in Leviticus 20:10, and it says that the adulterer and the adulteress should be put to death. Well, now wait a minute. That's not exactly this situation that we have here. There's only one out of the two people that are mentioned. What does Leviticus say? The adulterer and the adulteress should be put to death. Well, here's just the adulteress. Where's the adulterer? Well, we don't know. We don't know. Maybe he was somebody of stature. Maybe they thought he wasn't an important part of it. Maybe it's common practice to stone the one that's found, the person that's caught. We don't really know exactly, but what we do know is they're trying to trap Jesus, and so they've taken this woman and put her in front, and they're trying to shame her and guilt her and then condemn her, and they're trying to bring Jesus in on it. So she's believed to have been caught red-handed. Well, we know she's caught red-handed. She's believed to have been brought in front of him, Jesus, naked, embarrassed, clothed in dirt, covered in dirt, maybe mud from the sweat and the tears, and here she is just finding herself in quite the predicament. And you'll notice that through the Bible, a common theme of Jesus is that he never gets upset with the person who's found in sin. He never gets angry at that person. He does get angry at the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the ones who think or should know the law better than anyone else. Why does he get so frustrated with them? In fact, he gets irate with them because they don't understand the heart of the law. He's like, you know every word of it, you follow it, but you don't get it. You don't get the heart of what it is that I'm doing. And again, here, he doesn't get mad at the woman. He's not mad because maybe she doesn't understand the whole, everything surrounding her sin. So, verse 6, Jesus is about to teach them the heart of the law. Verse 6, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So it was a trap. You'll notice that word is sort of a key word in this sentence is trap. They're trying to bait Jesus into a holy war. They're trying to get into a holy discussion. They're actually trying to get him arrested, to get him prosecuted, because they think, in their mind, he only has two ways to go with this. You have choice A and choice B. He's either going to say stone her or don't stone her. That's our choices. And you can almost hear them planning this ahead of time. You know what we could do? We could go down. There's this rule that you have to stone people. So we could go down. We know Susie. She's kind of on that end of town, and she does those things. And so we can go grab her and bring her to him and go, okay, now she's caught. What do we do? And then if he says that we should stone her, then we can arrest him, because only Romans can say that you should stone somebody. Only Romans can put somebody to death. And if he says don't stone him, then we can arrest him anyway, because he's going against the very law of Moses and saying that Moses' law is stupid and that we shouldn't even follow it, basically throwing out the whole law just by saying that we shouldn't do that. So we can trap him. We've got him. Let's go. Let's do this. So that's where they bring him, and they give him choice A and choice B. Should we stone her or not? And just like only Jesus can, he chooses choice C, which is none of the above. The second part of verse 6. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, it is so unfortunate that we don't know what Jesus wrote. Man, that causes a lot of speculation, causes people all over the world throughout history to go, what did Jesus write? If we only knew, right? If we only knew what it was, I could do that to someone. If I knew what he wrote, I could get down and write in the dirt and fence off some accusers, maybe. We wish we knew, but we don't. You know, some people speculate maybe he wrote down the sins of the people who were there. Maybe he wrote down their names as if to say, I know everything about you already. Maybe he wrote down their specific sins. Maybe he just wrote down the 10 Commandments right there in the dirt, as we see that would play into kind of what comes next. But he could have been writing a whole host of things, and the reality is we just don't know what it is that he was writing. And obviously, it's not that important for the whole of the story, or the Holy Spirit would have included it. But since it wasn't included, we obviously don't need to know what it is that he wrote. But he got down calmly, started writing in the dirt with his finger. I like to picture something like calming for her. You know, fear not, child. I don't know. Could have been any one of these things that people think. But when he was finished drawing in the dirt, he stood up. Verse 7. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, this would lead a lot of smart people to think that maybe he was writing down their individual sins. Maybe he put their name and then next to it the sin, maybe the most recent sin they committed, maybe the bigger sin of their life that they had a hard time forgetting. Maybe that's what he wrote down by everybody's name as he scribbled in the dirt. Maybe he was just writing a verse number. I don't know. I don't know what he was writing. But you could see why people would want to figure it out and try to get it from what's written here in these verses. But you can almost see the surprise in their faces because he chooses choice C, which they didn't even think of. They didn't know that was a choice. They thought he's either going to say stoner or he's going to say don't, and we can get him. And he goes, nah, how about this instead? How about whoever's without a sin can throw the first stone? And that is very, very humbling for us. You know, they think, well, we had him, and then here comes this curveball. And Jesus did something outside of what they thought, or what we would certainly have thought. And then he does one more thing, verse 8. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. We don't know what. Did he finish his list? Did he finish the 10 Commandments? Did he begin writing something for her instead of for them? We don't know. We wish we did. Maybe one day we'll ask him if we actually care to know that once we're in heaven. With all that's going on, we may not even care. But we don't know what it was. But what we do know is that they begin to recognize that they're not dealing with a normal man. Something else is going on here. And that they, in their holier-than-thou attitude, are just as guilty as she is. And that's when it says, verse 9, at this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Man, picture that scene. What an intense moment. It's like something straight out of a movie. The tension in that moment when they're throwing her down and they're waiting in anticipation of an answer. And he fights them off with a simple phrase. If you're without stone, if you're without sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. What an amazing moment. Here's this woman caught in sin, dirty, naked, thrown before the very Son of God. In her guilt, in her shame, she slowly looks up, hearing that the silence of the crowd is dissipating. The noise of the crowd is dissipating. A silence is starting to set in. And she looks through her dirty, wet hair, through her muddy tears, and begins to see these other people who were trying to accuse her walk away, one at a time, oldest to youngest. And the only one left is Jesus standing there with her. If I stood up here today and said the same thing to you, said, those of you without sin, throw the first stone, you would all begin to leave one at a time till I was the only one here. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't be the only one here, right? Some of y'all caught it. You just weren't sure if you should laugh. It was okay. I wouldn't be here either. We would all be gone because none of us are without sin. Not any of us. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. That includes religious leaders. That includes the geniuses of our day and the geniuses of days past. Every person has sinned and fallen short. Everyone. And Jesus makes sure to call these guys out, to let them know it's not just this woman. It is every single one of you. And it took his death on the cross before our sin was wiped clean forever and ever. And we're not worthy. We are not worthy until Jesus, from the cross, transcends time and looks into the year 2013 and Midland Christian Church of Midland on Neely Avenue, and looks into this church and looks at Brandon Navarre, and he goes, I got your sin. I covered it. That's what I'm here for right now. That's why I'm up here, to take your sin away from you so you don't have to worry about it anymore. And he actually says the same thing to you and to me that he says to the woman that day. Verse 10, Jesus straightened up and he asked her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Now, go now and leave your life of sin. And that's what he's saying to you and to me. Quit what you're doing and go and lead a life that's worthy, that where you feel like I've actually done something for you. Lead a life of sinlessness. Go and sin no more. He raises the bar for us. Said it's not enough to just live life and be flippant about it, but to live life according to the plan of Jesus Christ. And we see this term woman as he refers to her, and we almost want to think of it as negative because that's how we would hear it today in today's age. If any of you females and I said, woman, you do this, and you'd be pretty offended by that. But what we see by Jesus is this is a term of affection. It's the same way he calls to his mother from the cross, and he's calling her deeply, intimately, woman. Woman, does anybody condemn you? Then neither do I condemn you. She was guilty, but instead of judgment, he extended grace. And he does the same for you, the same for you and for me. We're just like this woman, you and me. We're just like her. We've been caught red-handed in our sin. Our sin is apparent to God. There's nowhere we can go to hide from him and from his knowledge of our sin. No matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we try to cover it up, he knows about it. And we are caught red-handed before him. And we should be crying. And we should be at his feet. But then we should find confidence as he says to us, neither do I condemn you. Because you see, God's grace is a free gift, and it is also a freeing gift. It frees us from guilt that is associated with sin. When we leave behind our life of sin, we are no longer bound by the rules of this world. See, we begin answering to God. And instead of his glory pointing out all of our mistakes, instead of viewing God as this policeman or this parent or this guy with a big flashlight who's going through the nooks and crannies of our life trying to find sin so he can point it out to us, so he can get on to us for it and say, you haven't cleaned up that corner yet. I don't know what's going on with you. Why are you trying to hide all these things from me? Sometimes that's how we picture him. But instead of that, he extends grace to us, freely given and freeing from all the guilt Paul says it masterfully in his letter to the Romans in chapter 6 and verse 14. He says, "For sin shall no longer be your master, because you are not under the law, but under grace." We are not mastered by sin. We are set free by grace. We no longer have to hit our brakes when we think about God working in our lives. We no longer have to go, what am I doing? Am I okay? Is God going to forgive me this time, today? Is he? Oh, I don't know. That was a big one. That was a big sin. But instead, we should be running straight to him and embracing him and praising him for what a wonderful God that he is and the grace that abounds through Jesus Christ. You know, there are some churches who probably talk about grace not too much. You can't talk about grace too much, but they might put the wrong spin on it. But then there's some churches who falter the other way and don't talk about grace enough because they're afraid that if you talk about grace too much, people are going to think, well, I've got a get-out-of-jail-free card. I can sin as much as I want, and that grace is still extended to me. But you know what? I have a theory about that. I don't think we need to worry about how people take it because we do enough sinning on our own without worrying about whether we have a get-out-of-jail-free card or not. I think we need to understand God's grace. We need to recognize that he has freed us from the sin that's in our life. And we need to look at each other with the same lens of forgiveness, holding out our hand to say, how can I help you get through this? How can I help you get past this? God loves you. I love you. I want you to get through this. Reaching out to the lost, offering hope that comes and freedom that's received when you truly understand the grace of God. See, God doesn't care what your past looks like. He only cares about what your future in him looks like. Because his grace is sufficient even for me. His grace is sufficient even for you. His grace is sufficient even for this woman caught in adultery, naked and crying and muddy right in front of him. His grace was sufficient. Look at Paul. Before he was Paul, when he was Saul, he was killing Christians, persecuting the church. He lived a terrible life according to God, and God changed him. Was his grace sufficient? Absolutely. Absolutely. What about for John Newton? Wait, what? Who? John Newton, he's the guy that wrote The Amazing Grace, that hymn that we like to sing so much. John Newton was a horrible man, kind of like Paul, before he came to know Jesus Christ. Was the grace of Christ sufficient for John Newton? Nope, he just missed that boat. Darn it. It was good all the way up till the day before he was saved. No, it was good enough for him. It's good enough for you. It's more than sufficient to cover every one of our sins. God is not a cop. He is not an overprotective parent. He's not a probation officer. He's a God of love. And he wants you to accept his free gift that's not only free, but it's freeing. So if you're here today and you feel like you're ready to accept this gift from Jesus Christ, then we want to encourage you to do that. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song and we're going to invite you to make that decision, to follow Jesus Christ with 100% of who you are. Before you make any decision, let's go before the Lord in prayer to check our hearts.